Record. All right. Hi, everybody. This is the Homeschool Association of California presents File Your PSA with HSC. And my name is Jamie Heston. I'm oh my gosh, this is an old, I just realized I didn't update my screenshot here. I am not a board member anymore. I'm a former board member, current volunteer for HSC. I'm a homeschool veteran. My kids were 3 and 5 when I started, and they're now 19 and 21. And I have my UC Davis parent shirt on today. And so that is where they are now at school. Was a community organizer as well, and I'm a homeschool consultant as well, working with families that are, just starting getting homeschooling. I will answer questions at the end of this, and this may not be on the recording for those of you watching this later, but you can always join me for a free Homeschool 101 session. If you go to hsc.org/quick guide, you'll see a red button, and you can sign up for whenever the next Homeschool 101 is. At any time of year that you're watching this, there's always a Homeschool 101 upcoming, so you can always join me then. All right, so type any questions that you may have into chat, and we'll cover them at the end for sure. Okay. Alrighty, so let's get started. Okay, so the education code that talks about private schools is 48222, and you can go ahead and take a look. It's kind of interesting to look at. There's really not a lot of regulations for private schools. It's pretty hands-off, and so the requirements that are in the law are that the school be a full-time day school, and this is how we homeschool in California. We basically piggyback on the private school system, right? So there's no homeschool law. Some states actually have laws that are called homeschool laws very specifically, but we either are in a public school or a private school in California. So if you're filing the PSA, you're in a private school, you have a very small home-based private school. And so the requirement is that it be a full-time day school, which you would be because you'd be homeschooling at home, educating your kids at home, that the teaching be done by persons capable of teaching. That is not defined. And this is why parents can educate their kids, right? Because you just have to be capable of teaching. That instruction is made in the English language. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't teach another language. It just means that your kids basically pop out the other end and graduate being able to speak English and write English. So they can certainly learn another language. There are even public schools out there that are bilingual or immersion schools and things like that. So don't get hung up on that. Also, that instruction be offered in the several branches of study that are required to be taught in public schools. Now, offered, it's very interesting that they use the word offered because that doesn't mean you have to do it. It's sort of implied, but legally speaking, it says offered. So again, you obviously want to have your kid be educated by the time they graduate. So you're going to want to do English classes and grammar and math and science and history, of course, right? But there is a lot of flexibility within that. Definitely come to the Homeschool 101 that I host for lots more information about that, right? Um, so the private school affidavit is able to be verified by your local school district. And the form that normally takes is that when you're unenrolling from another school, a public school, they might ask you if they're aware that you're going to be homeschooling via the private school exemption. They may ask you for a copy of your private school affidavit. They don't need all of the information that you filled out on it. All they want to see is that PSA confirmation email that you get. So when you go file the private school affidavit, it instantaneously goes into a database with like 40,000 others. You get an email right away. So if you don't, check your junk mail, you can always file again. If that doesn't work and you just can't find it, you can always file again. It's not a big deal. But you want that confirmation email is the thing that you would send to the old school only if they ask for it. Okay, only if they ask for it. And this is certainly not something that you just need to send to like your local school district every year. It's really just asked for at the time that you're unenrolling from your previous school. And if your kid has never been in school before, then don't worry about it. You don't need to send it to anybody, right? It's just something to have on file. Like if you're the first person that I've ever heard of getting that knock on the door from a truancy officer, all you need to show them is your private school affidavit and your attendance records. Your attendance records show that your children are attending your school. Interestingly, the private school affidavit, when you file it, you don't put your kids' names in there. You'll see when we do that. So you just establish your school and say how many students you have and what grades they're in and what ages they are. Okay, so first things first, you're always going to unenroll from your previous school, okay? And the sample letter is at this website, right? If you go to hsc.org/PSA-info, there is a sample unenrollment letter there. There's also a sample unenrollment letter at hsc.org/quick guide. So that quick guide page basically has everything on it that I'm about to show you. So you don't necessarily need to write down every single one of these links. But you can just go to hsc.org/quick guide. That is always up. It's always got the PSA, the unenrollment form, instructions on how to file the PSA, like everything is there. Okay. So now, after you file this PSA, you've unenrolled, you file the PSA, you are now a school, you're going to keep a few records on file. We'll go over those in a second. You may want to request the records from your old school. That would be what's traditional. If you are transferring to another, let's say a paid private school or just another public school, you're moving states, you're moving counties, you're moving districts, that new school will generally request the records from the old school. That's a signal to the old school to kind of close out your file, right? But if you never did it, it's not a big deal. You don't have to. So if your kids are first, second, third grade and you don't have an IEP maybe, and there's just no records that you care about, you don't need them. You don't need the records. But if you do need them, you can certainly request them as the school, as the new school. So you're the new school, and you can certainly ask for your school to have these records for this student that is in your school. You can also ask for them as the parent. There's something called FERPA. If you look it up online, it's FERPA, FERPA. Look up FERPA. It's like the family something something, and basically it's sort of a law that basically gives you the right to look at your kid's file, right? So that's another way that you can get the information if you need it. Now, when you're going to go file this private school affidavit, you need to pick a school name. So before we file tonight, you're going to want to have a good school name. Usually recommend not doing your last name or your street name. And that's just so that, it doesn't super call out that you're homeschooling. We want it to be serious sounding and substantial sounding. Some people like to get kind of fun and whimsical and have, Happy Day School or, the TARDIS Doctor Who School or whatever, right? Like it can be a little silly sounding when you're younger. And that is totally fine. And you can always change it when they're older. But think about it on a transcript or a diploma someday. Think about your now 6-year-old being 18 and not being so happy with TARDIS school. Like maybe they want something more substantial or serious sounding. So just consider that. You can really do whatever you want. But again, consider this being on official documents or showing it to a potential employer, maybe if they want to see your diploma for some reason or your transcripts or something like that. So just think about it before you do it, okay? Now, the instructions, we're going to have the instructions up in one window and we're going to have the form up in another window when we do file the PSA a little bit later. So that's the best way to do it. So if you are following along with me and it is now in the future from when we actually recorded this, have one window up with the instructions, one window up with the form, and just follow it line by line. I get a lot of people who will ask me questions that are answered in the instructions. Okay. And again, these instructions are at hsc.org/quick guide. Okay. And one other thing, the private school affidavit does not need to be filed for kids who were not 6 as of September 1st. So let's say as of September 1st, you have a 5-year-old, maybe they're turning 6 2 days later. Doesn't matter. If they were not 6 as of September 1st, do not file for them. You will homeschool them. You will consider them to be kindergarten or first grade possibly, but you don't need the legal structure. So it's just no different than when they were 3 or 4. You still taught them things, but you just didn't have a legal structure, right? So you might have an older child that you're filing the private school affidavit for because they were 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 maybe as of September 1st, but your younger child, you don't have to file yet. Don't include them. The idea behind that is that we don't want the government to get super used to us filing for very young children because they might just make it mandatory someday. And we don't want it to be mandatory. We don't want kindergartners to have to go to school. Kindergarten is not compulsory right now in California. It is a choice for parents, and we want to leave it a choice and not make it mandatory. Okay, so keep that in mind. So if your child has turned 6 as of September 1st, you will include their student information. Remember, not their name, but their student information information will go on the PSA. Another tip, if you happen to have 6 or more children who are of PSA filing age, you might want to consider filing 2 private school affidavits and have like a school for the younger kids and a school for the older kids. Because if you have 6 or more, your information goes into the public database and you will now be required to submit your vaccination records. And the vaccination records don't have to be complete. You don't have to have complete vaccinations. They can be complete, incomplete, or absent. It doesn't matter, but you need to submit that now to Shots for School, which is a website online that all schools submit their vaccination records to. So you don't want to get caught up in that net. You want to be 5 or less and have that information be semi-private. It's still technically public because like I could go down to the CDE and look up your information, but who does that? Nobody does. I used my personal email on my PSA for 15 years and never got a spam email. The only email I ever got from the CDE was to remind me to file every year. That was it. Okay. So don't worry about that. But if you do have a bunch of kids, then you probably want to file 2. Okay, so the private school affidavit is filed every year between October 1st and 15th. However, or when a school is formed during the year. However, this year, the CDE said, you know what, we're going to make the form open early around August. They hedged their bets. They said around August 1st, because maybe one year August 1st falls on a Saturday. So they don't do it on a Saturday. I don't know. But around August 1st, it's going to open early. Now, that does not change the law. The law still says the filing period is between October 1st and 15th. So legally speaking, that is technically when you're supposed to file. However, the CDE has made it widely known and has put on their website that the forms open early and you can file early if you want. So clearly it's okay. And there's no private school police who are going to go and arrest you because you filed early when the CDE said you could. Okay. So do not stress about this. It's kind of weird for first-time filers, and it's kind of hard for families who are maybe homeschooling for the first time, but they want to sign up their kid for dual enrollment in community college, and they can't because they need the PSA. So for those 2 situations, it's very handy that the form is available early. For everybody else, you could wait until the 15th. So if you have an old school that's like, oh, we want to see your PSA because you left the school, and so we can close out your file, we need the PSA, go file a PSA. Just file it, give it to them, then you're done. So that was kind of a hassle for schools that you're leaving to wait until October for this PSA. So that has made that transaction a lot easier because again, they do have the right to quote unquote verify that you have filed it. They don't have the right or the authority to like reject it or anything. It's simply oh, you filed it, good to know. Okay, that's all. Okay, so it's not a big deal to go ahead and show them the confirmation email you got when you filed the private school affidavit. Okay, now the records to keep on file for the PSA are attendance. Super easy. You could use a cheap calendar on the wall. And the main thing is keep it separate from everything else, because again, if you were the first person in the world to get that knock on the door from a truancy officer, you only show them your PSA and your attendance. Your PSA shows a school has been created and your attendance show that you have students attending, right? And you only mark when they're absent. So this is a blank calendar that says, you know, Johnny's attendance for 2023, 2024, and it'll be a blank calendar. Certainly you could put, you know, first day of school, last day of school, vacations on there or whatever, that kind of thing. But otherwise, I mean, if they're on vacation, they're not absent, they're just on vacation, right? So you will have perfect attendance for the entire time your kids homeschool, because even if they're sick on a certain day, they're probably still like doing something educational on their iPad. They're reading a book. They're doing something. They're learning something. They cooked with you, whatever, right? They're doing the gardening. You went for a walk, you know, you did PE, like whatever, right? So you will have a blank calendar of attendance. You need a piece of paper that has your teacher qualifications. Now, if you remember at the very beginning, that very first slide where I said, here's the private school affidavit, like in the law, what it says. And it said that teachers persons must be capable of teaching. So this is you. If you are filing the private school affidavit, you are going to mark yourself as the teacher. If you're the only one filing it, you could add a spouse on there or a partner or something like that, but you don't have to. I filed it every single year by myself, even though there were other people involved in teaching my kids. Okay. If you are not hiring someone full-time, paying them full-time, have insurance, and you're a business and all that, you don't need to put anybody else on your PSA. This is just establishing your school. You're the parent, you're the teacher, you're the record keeper, you're all of those things. So whoever files that, we need your teacher qualifications on file. Now, private schools get to determine what the teacher qualifications should be. So whatever you have is great. I graduated high school. I didn't graduate high school. I graduated from the School of Life. I graduated from college. I have a resume. Anything along those lines. And no one will ever see this piece of paper. It's going to go in your homeschool file, either on your computer or in a physical file, along with all these other records that we're going to talk about. And that's it. Like, it's just a thing that private schools are supposed to do, right? Which makes sense if you have a big school and a lot of teachers, that you should have all the teacher qualifications on file. So it seems a little silly when it's just us, but we do it because that's the law, right? You also need a piece of paper. Again, this piece of paper will get thrown away when they're 18 and no one will ever look at it, of subjects offered. So the name of my school was Delano Bay Academy. Also, don't worry about if you duplicate somebody else's name, because it's associated with your address, right? It's not a business. So if you end up having the same, PSA school name as someone else, not a problem. So anyway, you would have a piece of paper that says Delano Bay Academy offers the following subjects, right? Just throw everything on there but the kitchen sink that you can think of that you ever did from grade 1 through 12. And certainly you could do a search and say, California Department of Education, educational requirements for 7th grade or whatever, and just, get an idea. But I mean, it's math and science and history and civics and writing and grammar and spelling and PE and foreign language and arts and crafts and music and just all the things. Make a big long list and put it on there, and you're only gonna do that once, okay? The other thing you need to have on file is immunizations. And as I said before, the immunizations can be complete, incomplete, or absent. It doesn't matter. Just have a record somewhere in your house or in your homeschool file of whatever that is, okay? Easy. And lastly, you're gonna file the PSA. And the filing of the PSA is simply notifying the state that your school exists. So you exist first, you begin operating, you begin teaching your kids, you put all this stuff on file, and then you file the PSA, right? And again, the PSA is open early now, so you can file it early if you want. Then you're done for the year, right? So I'm sort of advising new homeschoolers, if this is your first time, go ahead and file now, just get it done, right? But then every year after that, you can file between October 1st and 15th, or whenever the form becomes available. It's really up to you. If you just want to get it done so you know it's done, it really doesn't matter. This, a couple of years ago, they made the form editable as well. And they do want you to know, the CDE wants you to know that it is a snapshot in time. So when you file it, that's it. If you moved 10 days later, you don't need to refile. If you added a kid 10 days later, you don't need to refile. The attendance you're keeping for that kid will prove that your kid is in your school. You could also create a letter saying Delano Bay Academy students, that are enrolled in this school are, and you got to have a list of your 2 kids and put that in your file. But nobody's ever going to see it, right? It's just not necessary. I mean, it might be necessary if you were a big school with 1,000 students to have some sort of a record of who's attending, but you have 2 kids. You could create that anytime you needed to, right? No big deal. Okay, so the PSA is editable, and you could go back in there and switch your address and things like that, or add a kid, but you don't have to. They really truly believe it's a snapshot in time of that moment that you filed, at that moment that you created your school, and you don't need to change it. You can update any information the following year, okay? As I said before, you're the teacher, the administrator, and the record keeper. This does not mean that you can't have your spouse teach or be involved, or grandma, or hire tutors, or use classes. You can do any of that stuff, but you are just the person for your school who's doing that stuff. And as that person, you're going to decide on your calendar, your vacations, if you're even going to use curriculum. Are you going to be an unschooler? Are you going to be like a little bit schooly? I mean, you get to decide all of that. If you want more information on this, come to my Homeschool 101, okay? The next one is September 6th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. But if you're watching this after that time, because I will put this recording up, then just go to hsc.org/quick guide and click on the red button, and you'll see whenever the next one is happening. So you decide what constitutes enough learning for year-over-year promotion and graduation, and you will issue a diploma. Just to give you a quick example of this, my older kid did a fairly traditional high school 4 years, and we did English every year and math and science and history every year, right? Although when Algebra 2 didn't go so well, we switched to like, consumer math and stuff like that, right? And he's a history major, so he doesn't need to be like super STEM heavy, right? But my younger son saw my older son doing community college after I graduated him. And community college was online and during the pandemic. And my younger one was like, I write even better than my older brother. So I think I want to try a community college course. So we did a dual enrollment course second half of junior year. At that time, it went so well that he was like, can I just do more community college? So we graduated him. He only did 3 years of high school. He did not do 4 years of high school in 3 years. He did 3 years of high school. And then I graduated him and he started going to community college full time. Okay. You can go to community college if you have either a diploma, which he had because I issued him a diploma, or you're 18, which, he turned, just a few months later, or you pass the CHESP, which is the California High School Proficiency Exam. So any of those three will get you into community college. And so we graduated him and he did that, right? So you decide what your kid needs to do for you to issue a diploma. And that might look very heavy academically if they're trying to get into a 4-year college. So you're going to look at where they want to be and work backward. What do they need for high school? Okay. For me to issue that diploma. So the government doesn't interfere with how private schools are operated. So this is it. You keep this stuff on file. You file the private school affidavit every year. You educate your kid. That's it. They are hands off. There's no testing. There's no tax write-offs. There's no money. You're on your own. Okay. And this is where you heavily rely on the homeschool community for support and information. Okay. Now, there are no other required records, but of course I recommend that you keep track of what you're doing, especially if there's one parent not as involved. Go ahead and keep track of kind of what you're doing each week and, how many times you did math or what programs you're doing or what books you're reading and things like that. I loved doing that when my kids were younger, simply because I could look back over a month and be like, wow, we did a lot. Wow. Okay. It feels like we didn't do anything, but we actually did a lot. Like we went to this field trip and we went to these park days and, we went to this museum and, all of that. Right. And it's kind of neat for maybe your spouse to look at or your partner to look at to be like, oh, wow, what are you all doing? Right. So those are the kinds of records I recommend you keep. And if you're in the high school years, you want to keep a record of everything your kid is doing. So create a file on your computer. And then within that file, the transcript file, you'll have a folder for every semester. And within each folder for each semester, you can have a document in there that keeps track of all the books that were read. Maybe you have a different document that keeps track of all the field trips you guys did. Maybe you have another document that keeps track of something else that you guys did that might be relevant, volunteering or something. And then also maybe you put into that file any classes that they take and what the syllabus shows, right? And then later it's super easy to make a transcript because you've got everything separated by semester already. And it's really easy to then create a transcript based on that. Okay. All right. This is my quick little plug. Please consider becoming an HSC member. We do put on free PSA filing parties, free homeschool 101s. We have campouts and HSC conference every year for members. We offer a lot of support via our website and our phone line and our info@hsc.org line. We offer connection and regular meetings. We also sort of watch what's going on with the legislature to make sure that, no rules are coming down that are going to be heavy-handed on homeschooling. Lots of homeschooling advocacy and information and letting the public know about homeschooling so it's demystifying it as well. And you can also volunteer or give back through our organization. So consider becoming a member. It's only $30 a year. Okay. And let's move on here. Okay, so thank you so much. That's basically the information blurb, and we're going to get right to the filing. There are a couple of websites here. HSC Conference. The conference sadly is over for this year, but we do have one every year, so maybe you want to try to go next year. And then hsc.org, especially hsc.org/quick guide is a great informational page on our website about the PSA and filing, and always the link to the next Homeschool 101. And then my website, jamieheston.com, as I am a homeschool consultant if you're interested in that. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing for a moment just so I can go ahead and pull up the other screen. Okay, so let's pull up the private school affidavit. And whoops, let me stop sharing because let's see here. Okay, so we are going to share this. All right. So can you guys tell me if you are able to see the private school affidavit? Okay, great. Okay, and then I also want to have up hsc.org / quick guide is what we want. And we'll get up the instructions, or as my husband likes to call them, the destructions. Okay. Well, oh, no, don't do that. I didn't want to click that. Here, okay, here are the instructions. Okay, fantastic. All right, so we are going to attempt, see if this will do this. Will it allow me to put both of these on the screen? Okay, so we want to get down to the instructions. Okay, so I'm going to use the English instructions. And do this. All right, so if you guys want to file yours along with me, great. And if not, you can also just, watch and then like do it later, right? So it's totally up to you. So this PSA, okay, so, and Trisha, I can actually see you on screen. Can you see both of these? Just one. Oh, darn it. So it needs me to show, oh, that's a bummer. Okay. Hold on, let me see if I'm able to do, I need to just share my actual screen, my whole screen, right? So hold on. So let me say stop share, and then let me actually just share my screen rather than a window, my actual screen. Okay, so now you should be able to see both, I hope. Okay, fantastic. All righty. Okay, so here, and let's scroll down. Okay, so let me get down to the instructions. Okay, so pretty self-explanatory here, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to scroll all the way down. Are we a full-time private school? Yes, you are a full-time private school, and we're going to hit next. This is just going to take us page by page for every little question, okay? Did you file an affidavit last year? Now, if you're a brand new filer, you would say no to this and you would proceed with a blank affidavit. If you filed last year, you usually receive an email that that says, here's your code, right? So if you say, yes, proceed using last year's, it will give you a code to put in. But let's even say that you've lost that email and you don't have it, just proceed with a blank affidavit. The only reason that the yes question here is helpful is that it pre-fills some of your information. So we're going to assume that you guys have not before since you're here with me today. Okay, and we're going to hit next. So the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to put the name of your school in, and you can see that I have filled this out before because here's Delano Bay Academy. Okay. Now this CDS code that is for bigger schools. You just don't even have to worry about that. And then we're going to say, well, what county am I in? So figure out which county you're in, and then it's going to say what district you're in. Now I happen to know that I'm in New Haven Unified, right? But you can just look it up online. Just look up what school district am I in, and just type in your address or whatever you need to do to figure out which district you're in. So this is not like if you got this wrong by accident. Again, the form is editable, so you could go back in and fix it. But it's really just a they just want to know how many people are filing for PSAs in this particular district. Because they're basically sort of assuming that, well, I would be sending my kids to New Haven if I wasn't homeschooling. So they're probably just sort of tracking that to understand, where all the kids are going, basically, right? Okay. Now for number 5, and here are the instructions you see that talk about the type of school. Okay, so people get a little confused on this. I only have boys. Shouldn't I put boys only? And basically, it's just kind of like, just always select coeducational, because you never know. What if somebody, what if you have another kid? What if your niece suddenly needs to be homeschooled and you're helping out and they're going to be in your PSA, or who knows, right? Just easier to put coeducational. It really doesn't matter, but just coeducational is easier. You are a day only school, and this is confusing as well. But we live at my house, right? Yeah, but you're not a residential boarding school, and there's a bunch of like rules that come along with that. So you don't want to be subject to any of those rules. So let's just say no, that you are not a residential boarding school, because that has more regulations and we do not want that. Now, here is another one that really confounds people. Does the school provide special education? Well, my kid has an IEP, so I do, right? No, you do not. You are not a special ed educator yourself. Okay, you are going to be outsourcing that to people. You're going to be helping your kid who is special needs, but you do not officially full-time hire a special education specialist. So no, okay, no, 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 always. Does the school provide a homeschool diploma? You will always say yes, even if your kid, well, I just have a first grader, right? So I don't provide a high school diploma. Yeah, you do. You're not there yet. But you absolutely do. Okay. And it's especially important if you offer secondary education from grade 7 to 8. But you can just put yes, you provide a homeschool diploma, because your school will be for 1st through 12th graders. Even if you only have a 4th grader, your school still is going to cover that range, because your kid will get older eventually, right? Now, here's another thing that gets a little bit confusing. If I have just a 6-year-old in my school right now, actually, that's the next question. First of all, this is simply asking what grades does your school cover? So I kind of just talked about that, right? So your school, again, remember, kindergarten is not compulsory, so we never want to check kindergarten. Your school educates children who are grade 1 through grade 12, okay? Even if you have only one kid in one of those grades somewhere in the middle, you will always say that it's grade 1 through grade 12. This is unless you are one of those families that has 6 or more kids and you're creating 2 schools. One of your schools will be maybe grade 1 through 5, and the other one would be grade 6 through 12, or something like that, right? So, but for most of us, we're going to say the low grade in the school is 1 and the high grade is 12. This does not correlate to who's actually in the school. We'll get to that, okay? Now, the classification of the school is always going to be non-religious, even if you are religious, even if you're teaching religion, okay? Even if religion is important to you, okay? So there could be additional requirements imposed on a religious school. So it's just more straightforward to say no, non-religious, okay? This does not preclude you from teaching religion in your school, okay? So we're going to click next and go to the next page, hopefully. Okay, so again, here you're just putting in your address, okay? So I'm just going to put my address in there, and this is your physical address, and then in your mailing address. And so nice, they put this little, just copy it in there. So yay, super easy. And the next page, I mean, that part is really, really easy, okay? So now you're going to put your phone number in, super easy, and your email. And I don't have a website, so I'm not going to do that. Website is usually, again, for businesses, right? So that's pretty easy. You just put your information in. We're going to hit next. Now you're going to be asked if the school's name has changed since last time. So you may have chosen that whimsical, silly name and you've thought better of it and you want to change it. So yeah, that's fine. You could say, yes, it's changed because, last time you had it one name and now you're naming it something else. And so you would go ahead and say yes. But for me, I always kept the same name. So I just hit no, and then that blanks out that field. Has the public school district in which the private school is located changed? Now, what would happen there is if I was in New Haven School District in Alameda County, because I live in Hayward, but then I moved. So my school is still Delano Bay Academy. I'm still in California. I'm still educating my kids under Delano Bay Academy. So I would say yes here if I had moved, and now I'm somewhere different. But I have not moved, so I'm going to say no. Okay, and we're going to scroll down over here as well. Okay, now here is where, again, things get a little confusing. So this is the range of students in your school now. So originally we were putting just what grades you cover in your school, which was grade 1st through 12th. Now we're talking about the actual kids in your school. So let's say I have a 6-year-old. Okay, so I'm going to put, I have a 6-year-old who is 6 years and 3 months old. Oh, and I also have an 8-year-old. So that's what you would do. You would put 6 years, 3 months, and 8 years old. But let's say you have only the 6-year-old. Then you would put 6 years, 3 months, and my oldest child is also 6. Okay. Or if you have an 8-year-old, I have an 8-year-old who's 8 years and 6 months old, and I also have an 8-year-old. Okay. Or let's say you have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old, then you would put 8 years, 6 months, and 12 years, and so on and so on. Okay. So now let's say I do have, so let's say I have an 8-year-old and 8.5-year-old and a 12-year-old. Okay. Well, actually, let me just switch it to 6. Let me say I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, right? So that'd be first grade and third grade, right? So here I go. Here's enrollment. Okay. Now enrollment means I have one first grader and I have one third grader. Okay. Now make sure at the bottom that whoops, somehow it didn't look at, see, it didn't register. So it's got enrollment count 1. Oh, it just switched to 2. Okay, so you want to double check that that is correct. That total enrollment counts equals the number of children you have. Okay, so put in whatever grades they are. Now, don't get too hung up on the grade. A lot of people are very school centric in their thinking. And they're like, oh, my kid is doing 4th grade work, but they're in 3rd grade. So should I put 4th grade? I'm like, well, you typically want to use the chronological age. You can always switch it later. You don't have to reflect what work they're doing in this PSA. Okay, you can place them in a grade and always change it later. A really good example of this is that kids who are ready for concurrent enrollment in college really early. They might be, let's say they're 11 years old, right? But the community college requires that students either be 16 years old or in 10th grade. But this student is gifted and advanced and ready to do community college level work. You can place the child in 10th grade on your private school affidavit and then show that private school affidavit to the college in order to enroll your child early. So that is one way that you can do that. And then they would just like remain in 10th grade for a couple of years running. And that doesn't mean that the transcript has to reflect several sophomore years of high school. You could simply put freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, even though the PSA reflected something different. Nobody is ever going to match those two things up. So don't get too hung up on what this is. Do whatever level work your kid is at, and you can always adjust this later or the next year or whatever. Okay, it's totally up to you. All right. Now, report the number of students who graduated last year. Well, if you had nobody graduate last year, you'll put 0. I got to do this one time because my older son graduated and my younger son only did the PSA for 1 more year. So I got to say, I had a kid graduate last year, and then that was it for me. So, okay, so now for number of staff. Again, this gets a little confusing. You're going to be like, well, okay, I'm a full-time teacher and I'm also the administrator. So that, okay, but if you're the only one filing this, you can only fill this out for 1 person. Your total staff count is going to be 1. Again, this does not mean that your hubby or your partner is not involved here. We're just talking about staff employed by the school. It's a bad word because you're not employing yourself, right? So it's just easy for 1 person to file it and say there is 1 full-time teacher. You have to have a teacher, right? You can't be like, well, I'm just going to be the administrator and have the teacher thing be 0. It won't let you continue if you do that. Okay. You have to have at least 1 full-time teacher. So you will be the full-time teacher. You certainly can put, oh, I'm going to put my husband in there as the administrator if you want. It's totally fine. But for me, this is how I filled it out every year for 15 years was just, I'm the full-time teacher. And you will be designated as the full-time teacher even if you outsource everything. You could outsource, you could use a Celis, or you could use a Time for Learning, or you could use an outside tutor, or you could use several vendors outside and lots of classes online. It doesn't matter. You're still the full-time teacher for the school. We need a teacher for the school, okay? An official teacher. Doesn't mean you're actually doing the teaching. You're just designated as sort of like the head teacher. Think of it like that, okay? Now, this is pretty easy. At this point, we're to, the administrative staff. So think of a salutation that works for you, okay? There's, oh, actually, there's a bunch of them here. So Mrs., and then my name and my information. Now the title, think of which one works for you. Which one do you want to be? Do you want to be administrator? Do you want to be director? You want to be executive director, head of school, headmaster, like Harry Potter? What do you want to be called? I always chose administrator. So just pick one and stick with it throughout. Whichever one you pick doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's just whatever your preference is. So I'm going to choose administrator. And we're going to keep going. And my address is in there. And then look, now who's the director? Well, me again. And all my information goes in here once again. And then we're going to hit next. Oh, position is required. Oh, administrator. There we go. Okay, so I'm the administrator for all of these things. Okay, we're going to click next. And now who's the contact for the school? So I always tell people the PSA is mostly entering your address and your name in like a bunch of times. Okay, so now you are this as well. So I am Mrs. Jamie Heston, and my title again is administrator. Okay, so just pick one and stick with it. And oh, where are the records being kept? Okay, well, the records will be at your school. Now, you cannot use a PO box for this. It has to be a physical address. I do know some people who file the PSA who like World School and they travel a lot. It is allowable to use your work address for the PSA. Okay. And there could be several schools at one address. That actually happens in real life. You know, you go to like a public school and there's like buildings right next to each other and it's two schools. I mean, that happens there too, and they have the same address, right? So, so you are allowed to use a work address if you're based in California, but you're traveling and maybe you sold your home or something, but California is your home base. It's where you pay taxes, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Okay. Now, at the end, you're going to acknowledge that the above mentioned records are maintained at the address stated and are true and accurate. So these are the records that we talked about: attendance and, you know, and your immunization records and all of those, and the PSA, right? So where you are keeping those is what address you want to use. Okay. Also regarding the PSA, just so you know, every parent should just file their own. If you're helping out with someone's kid, you want them to be ultimately responsible for their education. Everybody just files their own. Look at how easy it is. It's super easy. File it, keep a few records on file, and then you guys can all communally help each other educate kids. But it's just best because if you have a kid who's not in your family, not living in your home under your PSA, you now fall under a bunch more rules. You're more of a private school, like an actual legal private school. Even if you're not getting paid, you don't want to invoke all of those rules. Okay, you guys just want to, you know, work together on homeschooling, right? Now, these tax status acknowledgments, okay? You're not a corporation. You don't have a tax exemption or anything like that. So you are none of the above. You are none of these, okay? You're not tax exempt. You're not a church. You're not, you know, anything like that. So just none of the above is always what we select for that. Okay. Now, these are a bunch of acknowledgments. Okay. This is just acknowledging that this is a public record. Now, again, it's not online. Like if you have 6 or more kids and it's searchable online, ours are put into a different database because they note, oh, they've got less than 5, you know, 5 or less kids. So it's going to go in a different database, but it still is technically public. I mean, somebody could contact the CDE and say, hey, can you look up this person or this school? Or they could go down to the CDE office and look it up. So it is somewhat public, okay? You know, you can actually go through all of these rules here. They're pretty perfunctory. The one I do want to go over is toward the end here, that you want to retain a copy of this document for 3 years. And I would just keep it for the entire time you homeschool. Don't get hung up on this. It says a private school shall not employ a person who's been convicted, you know, blah, blah, blah. That does not apply to parents and their own children. Okay, because I actually had a parent call me the other day who had been convicted of something and was like, does this preclude me? And no, it does not. Okay, so you're not employing someone. You are the owner of your school. So you're not employing someone who's been convicted of a violent or serious felony. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, this is also very, very important. This last bit here, the students enrolled in this school are full-time students in this school, and you're not enrolled anywhere else, okay, on a full-time basis. This is why it's so important to unenroll from the previous school first. So if the school gives you any pushback on saying you're not unenrolled until we see this PSA, you just need to tell them, I legally cannot I cannot submit this until they're unenrolled. You need to tell me they're unenrolled and then I can file it. It'll happen 5 minutes later and I'll get this PSA confirmation right to you, but they have to unenroll first, okay? Because you are attesting that they are not enrolled anywhere else. So they have to be not enrolled, okay? So you're going to acknowledge all of this and you're going to hit the next button. And again, we're going to put in a bunch of information about ourselves, okay? And we're going to put, again, that we're the administrator. And then you're going to insert a security question. What was your childhood hero? Superman. Okay, so you're going to have that. And the last thing we get to do is we just get to review it. Okay, we get to review everything that's in here. Does it all look correct? Do I have all the right information in? Did I fill everything out? And the last thing you're going to do is you're going to hit submit affidavit. Okay, now I'm not going to do that because I don't have any kids today who are homeschooling. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And let's see if you have any questions. If you are watching this in the future, please go to hsc.org/quick guide and look for more information about future Homeschool 101 sessions or how to contact HSC if you have further questions. And I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you so much for joining me.